They're always upgrading Zoom. It's like every day there's a new thing that Zoom tells us or new, I don't know.
Sometimes Ben's kind too. So when they post it on the website, I found when I chit chat with the speakers before the waiting room is open, sometimes that's on the recording. So
yeah, it starts recording as soon as I started. So I try and stop it and then restart it a little closer to the start time so we don't get all that 15 minutes of chit chat. So.
Everyone can hear our conversations.
Yeah, it's kind of like when graduate students, finally have a representative at faculty meetings, they realize just how dull they are.
Hey, I take offense to that.
Hey, Kevin.
Hey, Jim, how are you?
Good, how are you doing?
Good to see you.
You too. Your chair.
So are you in your office, or it looks like a home office?
Oh no, it's the lab.
Lab, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, people think it's a picture until somebody walks by.
Yeah.
This is cool. We get to see what your lab looks like. That doesn't always happen when you give a seminar.
Not too fancy.
Kind of, yeah.
If you're on a laptop, you can give us a walking tour,
No, I know. I can show you with my camera the spots in my ceiling.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
They're fixing the roof, so hopefully that'll go away.
So it kind of makes you feel like you're back in the old Gwynn Hall.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, good to see you.
Hi, Jill.
Hey, Jill.
Hey, Vicki. Haven't seen you in a while either.
Yeah, I've been cooped up.
Working on a
I'm grant
project.
writing mode. I haven't blinked. I'm like, my eyes are like, wait, I haven't blinked in 5 days. Trying to get this grant done. Blink. Yeah, I'm here.
So does Rachelle Reed, hi. Do you have
Hi.
Do you have an association with MU?
Not really. I have never been there. I know Dr. Dillon from Instagram, believe it or not. We met through just like the science community on Instagram and hit it off. We have so many things in common. So here we are.
We will make an effort after this pandemic is over to invite you to come to campus. So.
Yeah,
I would love that. Yeah, absolutely. But I'm super pumped to be here, even virtually. So thank you for having me.
Well, we're excited. I think
Thank you for joining us.
Really good for the students and even for some of us faculty who might be looking for opportunities that they hadn't thought about. Right?
I'm still trying to figure out what to do when I grow up. So yeah, I'll be listening.
Yeah.
On that note, we'll start. So thanks everybody for attending. So this is our weekly nutrition, exercise, physiology seminar at Mizzou. And this week the format is a little bit different. We're really lucky to do more of a roundtable discussion. And I will say, I told our speakers to I estimated about 20 people would attend, and we're already at 41. So that's fantastic. So thank you, everybody. So the format today, right, many of our students are unsure of their career path, right? They're familiar with what a career in academia and research or teaching might look like, but a career in industry is much more unclear. So for many, it sounds interesting, but elusive. So today we have the unique opportunity to hear from experts in the transition from academia to industry. So we're so grateful that Dr. Perfield and Dr. Reed have taken time from their busy schedules to talk to us in this more informal setting. So with that, I'm going to first pass it on to Dr. Vera Potter to introduce our first guest.
Okay. Well, it is my great pleasure to welcome back to MU, at least virtually, Dr. Jim Perfield. I'll start by saying Jim and I have had some interesting crossover in our history in the field of obesity and metabolism. First, Jim was my predecessor when I was a postdoc at Tufts in Boston, the HNRCA. And then I hadn't actually met Jim until later, but I absolutely benefited from how meticulous he was with protocol descriptions and was able to work on a study that he really pioneered in the lab that we both did our postdocs in. And so then fast forward several years later, and again, Jim was my predecessor here in NEP, and he actually left MU to join Eli Lilly right before I started. So he keeps doing this thing with me where I get to benefit from all of the things he's laid down, and then he like leaves. And so I've really, really benefited from him tremendously. So I need to thank him for that. In fact, I actually took his old office and lab when Gwyn was being renovated. I took his old office and his lab in Eccles. And again, he left me tons of stuff there. So I can't thank him enough. And anyway, it made my first year as an assistant professor much easier. So I can tell you that he was very helpful. And I will say, aside from being meticulously organized and an exceptional scientist, Jim is really one of the nicest people I've ever met. And I need that really. He is someone who's always willing to help, despite being always very, very busy. So it is no surprise that he agreed to come and share his path with all of you. And so anyway, with that, I will let Jim continue on. I know he's going to talk about his career path. So anyway, wanted to personally thank you, Dr. Perfield, for coming back to see us. And with that, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks for the nice introduction. And, you know, if you had bought my house, then we really would have completed the trifecta. But I guess I laid enough groundwork. Can't do everything. So I guess in this first 5 minutes, just kind of lay out my career path, which has been a very windy one. So I started thinking that I wanted to be a marine biologist. So I went to the University of North Carolina for undergrad. About a couple of years into that, realized that maybe marine biology wasn't what I wanted to do, but I liked biology. And so I started looking at grad school as an opportunity to not have to pay back student loans right away, and decided to look at biochemistry programs as well as animal science. So I grew up in upstate New York and had an animal agriculture background, and ended up going to grad school at Cornell University, working with Dale Bauman on lactation physiology. And so this was a really great opportunity. I walked into a project that was just getting off the ground in terms of a serious issue for farmers in terms of milk fat depression. And so this is farmers are paid on milk components, and so fat is one of the major components in milk. And under certain dietary conditions, there's a reduction in milk fat. And so we identified unique bioactive fatty acids that had dramatic effects on milk fat production. And so I did both my master's and PhD in that lab, and really learned a lot about whole animal physiology, how to interact. It gave a lot of opportunities for interacting with industry and seeing a direct impact of your research on end user. But as that was wrapping up, I really felt like I had a lot of applied experience, but didn't have the basic molecular biology skills to really help build a scientific career. And so I started looking at postdoc programs that focused more on adipose tissue metabolism. So I really liked the fat work that I had been doing previously related to milk fat, and a place that I could do more molecular work. And so I ended up at Tufts Human Nutrition Research Center in Boston, working with Andy Greenberg. And so I spent 3 years there, working with a great lab group, learning a lot about cell culture and regulation of adipose tissue metabolism. This was right around the time that the primary adipose tissue triglyceride lipase was identified. So trying to understand the mechanism by which that interacts with all the other lipases in the adipocyte. And then also, this was around the time that adipose tissue inflammation was being linked to insulin resistance, and crown-like structures had been identified in adipose tissue. And so was really fortunate to work on those projects as well. So then after 3 years of a postdoc, I started looking for other opportunities. And I actually interviewed in both industry and academia at that time. I guess I should take one step back and say one of the opportunities that I had during my postdoc was to go to Vanderbilt and do a hyperinsulinic glycemic clamp course for a week. And while I was there, I met this other guy from Missouri, Scott Rector. And so he kind of put the bug in my ear that there was a position that would be opening there and that this would be a good fit. And so that happened. And then shortly thereafter, the liver meeting was in Boston. And so he and John Tifo came out and we spent some time together in Boston. And so that was also a good experience. And so I applied for the position, was fortunate enough to be able to get an interview, and then ultimately came to Missouri as a joint appointment in nutrition, exercise, phys, and food science. And so I had a lab in Eccles Hall. And so really during my 4 years at Missouri, I tried to combine both my postdoc and graduate work together, looking at bioactive fatty acids and their role. So we had a SCD1 inhibitor from sterculic oil that we looked at in different metabolic models. We started the OSMA pig breeding program up again, looking at a model for childhood obesity and fatty liver. And then I also was working with Gary Weissman and Mick Petras, looking at the P2Y2 receptor knockout mice and their role in adipose inflammation and insulin resistance. So had pulled together a nice lab group and was really starting to hit my stride there. When my wife, she had all the time been working for Elanco, which is the animal health division of Lilly. She had been traveling quite a bit in her role and decided that wasn't going to be viable for long term. And so she was offered an opportunity to come to work in a regulatory role here. And so we started looking to see what other opportunities would be available here. And that's when I moved to Lilly. And so actually, when I moved to Lilly, I didn't come into the position I have now. I came into the clinical pharmacology group. So I spent a year supporting early phase clinical development studies, and the biopharm studies. So that would be single and multiple ascending dose phase 1 studies, as well as studies that support food-food interaction, or all the things that end up on your drug label in terms of whether you should eat with food or not, other drug interactions to worry about. So that was a good experience, but really made me recognize that I still wanted to be back closer to the research side of things. And so there was an opportunity to move to the FGF21 group in the discovery biology group. And so I came back here and started a lab, and so I've been within the diabetes therapeutic area for the last 7 years, starting in the FGF21 group, and then kind of evolving as our programs have evolved to more of a novel targets and platforms. And I could talk a little bit more about what that looks like from a day-to-day basis afterwards. But so kind of a winding career driven by interest in science and some family decisions along the way, but that's my story.
Nice, thank you. So we have it in a little bit, it'll be a panel. So we have 2 people, Dr. Perfield, for anybody that joined late, and then also Dr. Reed. So now that we've met Dr. Perfield, Dr. Dillon's going to introduce Dr. Reed, and we'll hear her story. And then I'm really going to open up the floor. So as our speakers are talking, just think about questions that are coming up as you hear about their path, and you'll have the opportunity in a little bit to ask them a lot more questions in detail. So I'll pass it to Dr. Dillon.
I'm very excited to be welcoming Dr. Rachelle Reed, who's the Global Director of Fitness Science at Orange Theory Fitness. She joined Orange Theory Fitness in 2019. With a BS, MS, and PhD in exercise physiology, Dr. Reed brings forth expertise in body composition, metabolism, physical activity measurement, behavior change, along with 12 years of group coaching experience. So as Director of Fitness Science, she aims to translate research about physical activity and behavior change into practice, bridging the gap between academia and the fitness industry through the Orange Theory workout. Rachelle also manages the Medical Advisory Board and works closely with all other departments on science-backed brand-wide initiatives. And prior to joining Orange Theory, she worked as the kinesiologist for Pure Barre through Exponential Fitness. Now, she does a lot of outreach to social media, and that's how I actually met her. And her Instagram account is an excellent example of how to translate research findings for the lay audience. And I'll put her account name in the chat so you can look her up. With that, please welcome Dr. Reed.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really, really excited to be here and talk to you guys today. I figure I'd start all the way back in undergrad. I also went to UNC. Dr. Perfield, so we have that in common. Majored in exercise science with a minor in psychology, and I just remember my parents being like, psychology, I don't think you're going to be able to find a job with that. So I was like, all right, I'll do exercise science and add that on. And I really fell in love with physiology throughout my undergrad career. I know that sounds so corny, but I can really think back to one lab that I took over the summer, and I got the chance to, like, got to try out at UNC to be in this medical anatomy cadaver lab. And I was one of the students from the program that was selected, and all of the physiology and anatomy like finally clicked. And I was like, I have to learn more about this. This is so cool. And so I decided that I wanted to go on to graduate school, and ended up at the University of Georgia in the kinesiology program there for my master's degree. And I actually worked in a lab that was really focused on physical activity measurement and compensation. So compensatory responses when somebody starts an exercise program, how that changes their other behaviors. And that was back in 2009 and 2010 when wearable devices were first like really hitting the market. So it was like right when Fitbit was kind of popping up. And so we were really looking a lot at like research grade accelerometers, and gosh, I got so nerdy and really started to love the numbers and the analytics that was involved with that, and figuring out how, how that impacts metabolism. When someone starts moving more, what actually happens with their metabolism? How does that affect their behavior change? But I was also kind of like, I don't know, I'm kind of sick of school after 6 years of college. And so I had a year and a half in between my master's and PhD, where I actually was a clinical research coordinator also at the University of Georgia. And that allowed me to really understand team science a little bit better. So I was coordinating 2 industry-funded grants, actually, which was kind of how I started to think about the industry. I was like, oh, this is so interesting. The industry, this elusive thing, actually funds science. Who knew? You just don't really get exposed to that unless faculty in your department have a grant like that. And so that was really my first taste of industry. And the studies that we were doing were mostly focused on middle-aged women with metabolic syndrome, figuring out different doses of high protein, lower protein diets, what's going to be best with what kind of dose of resistance training. And I decided, you know what, I really do like this stuff. I want to become an expert. I want to know as much as I can. So I went back to get my PhD, and so finished that in about 3.5 years, only because I had been with the department for so long. I got to like move fast, which I know is rare. So I'm very thankful for that, because I think, if there were more years, I might have been like, and my dissertation focused on adolescent females. So I had done so much work in the body composition and metabolism lab at the University of Georgia on older adults, specifically older women. And I kept thinking, like, I really want to learn more about how we can influence behavior in younger people, so that way maybe they're more likely to maintain those health behaviors as they age. And so I actually set out to do a dissertation about social media. This is, again, like before we even really had Instagram, a social media-based intervention for middle school girls. So it was a lot of fun. It was a exercise and behavior change intervention. I had null results. I feel like that happens a lot in dissertation studies. You like really bust your butt for a long time, and then it's like, oh, the results are null, except some psychosocial variable changes, but that's, important too. So that was a lot of fun. And then I knew I wanted additional training in the areas of cognition and behavior change. And so I was able to apply for and get a postdoc position also at the University of Georgia, but in the exercise psychology space. Because again, I just really, I felt like the psychology piece was really important for me to understand. And so I was fortunate to work on another industry-funded trial, actually, through PepsiCo. And this particular trial had a clinical monitor, which I'm sure most of you are aware of what that means, but it essentially is someone who is coming in and really triple checking every single thing that you do to make sure the data that you're collecting and reporting are reliable and valid and all of that. And so that was really interesting to me. And I was kind of like, wow, this person is so polished. He has a PhD, he's applying it in this different way. And I kind of started to think about, okay, I actually could see myself doing a role like that. And throughout my postdoc, I feel like there were so many epiphanies, because I also started coaching at a local Pure Barre studio. I was like, you know what, postdocs don't make that much money. Got to figure something out, because I got to start paying my student loans soon. So I need something else that I'm doing. And I had coached group exercise in varying formats all the way through. And so I tried out to become a Pure Barre coach at the local studio and ended up getting hired, thankfully, loved it. And it just so happened that one of my first classes, the then CEO of Exponential Fitness was in town observing the studio and took my class. And after class was asking me a couple of questions, and he was like, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm actually in a postdoc for kinesiology, specifically exercise psychology." And he said, "We don't have anyone like that on our team. We don't have anyone who's trained in any kind of exercise science. We're all business people. We might be able to use your help." And I was like, awesome. So it literally I stumbled into this consultant role for the company. And so while I was doing my postdoc, I was also able to start, getting my toes wet and what an industry role could look like. So my first big assignment was rewriting the training manual about anatomy and physiology for coaches. So I got to apply my knowledge in a different way, and it was fun and challenging. And I was kind of like, I think I like this, but I need to learn a little more. So after my postdoc, which was about a year and a half, there was a temporary faculty position opened. So somehow, by the grace of God, they let me do it. For 1 year, somebody was out on maternity leave. It was a lot of fun. I got to teach chronic disease prevention, exercise phys. And so it gave me, kind of a taste of what it would be like to be a junior faculty member, but I was able to keep this consultant role up as well. And so at the end of that year, I was applying for faculty jobs. I was also applying for industry jobs, and Exponential Fitness asked if I wanted a full-time opportunity. And so I just remember sitting down with my husband and being like, I don't know, because I was groomed through this very specific channel in academia to be a very, a researcher who could contribute to my specialized field. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go this way and throw all the cards out on the table. And so I called my PhD advisor, Ellen Evans, and I told her, hey, I'm not going to take this faculty job that I got offered, and instead I'm going to do this. And she was like, I know, I've always known. You've always had that itch, and I'm so glad you're following it. And so I worked full-time for them for about 2 years. And then this role at Orange Theory Fitness, actually, they recruited me for that. And so I think there's this transition happening in the fitness industry where they're putting a bigger emphasis on actually having qualified professionals on their corporate teams, which is awesome for all of us, because I've always felt like there's this very strange gap between what we actually know about science and behavior change and people, and then the very strange things that happen in the fitness industry. So it's been a unique challenge. It's been a really rewarding and crazy year since I joined the Orange Theory team, but that's kind of how I got to where I am today. Lots of twists and turns, but all of the experiences that I had, Orange Theory has wearable devices, and I studied those in my master's degree. What a weird thing to really want to be obsessed about, but it's paid off. And so I think all of these pieces can apply in a very unique way.
That's fantastic. Thank you both so much. I think we've already learned a lot from both of you in about 10 minutes. So I think this is going to be really, really worthwhile. So thank you both, Dr. Perfield and Dr. Reed, for sharing your stories. Now, if people could turn their videos on, that would be really helpful, because the rest of this is really going to be a conversation. So it's really nice if they can see who's talking to them. I would prefer not to moderate. I'd really like everyone to feel comfortable asking their own questions to Dr. Reed and Dr. Perfield. So if you feel comfortable, feel free to ask your question to them. If we start running into each other, I'll use the raise hand. Or you can type your comments into the chat, and I'll make sure that they get it too. So with that, I'll just start with the first question, just from the chat already. So Dusty Shea asked, she said, the biggest criticism I hear about industry positions is how much of your creative freedom as a scientist is squelched. So I don't know if Dr. Reed or Dr. Perfield, do you have a comment you'd like to make about that?
Yeah, I can start, and then I'm sure Dr. Perfield, you have way more experience than I do, so I'll be curious to hear if your perspective or if maybe mine will change as I gain more experience. But I would say, just like most things in science, it kind of depends. It was shocking for me at first to really have an inside view into what the business wants and what they need, and to figure out how, if for example, we're doing a research study or we're investigating something, we can fulfill that, but then I can also fulfill the scientific points or questions. I can figure out the answers to the questions that I need to figure out. So it's sort of like, in my experience anyway, a little bit of a balancing act. And I think it's honestly a little bit similar to grant writing sometimes. Like the experience I had in grad school and in my postdoc for writing grants, you see a call and you're kind of like, okay, I can address that. And then I can also slide these things in here that I'm really passionate about, or I can kind of gear it this way. And so I think it's a give and take, and figuring out how to navigate the business side and balance it out with science. I don't know, Dr. Perfield, what you think?
Yeah, I don't think it'd be possible to develop new drugs without creative freedom. So you actually have to, there's a lot of freedom in terms of things that we can work on. You have to understand the business case and what the indications are and where the bar is set. And so obviously if you have a favorite target that you'd like to hammer away on forever, there's probably not going to be a lot of support for that. But as long as you're adaptable and understand the bigger picture, I think there's a lot of freedom, and you're actually rewarded for being innovative, thinking outside the box, and applying a lot of new technologies to try to identify that most newest, greatest therapy.
I have a question. How's it going, everyone? Dr. Reed and Dr. Perfield, thanks for being here. So I guess my question is more related to how someone navigates the industry upon graduating. So you get your PhD, you most likely do the postdoc. How do you, after doing all of that work, begin to navigate that realm of trying to find a job and make sure that you're kind of going into an industry job that you're going to enjoy working in? Because I see myself right now kind of wanting to go towards industry after graduating, and then maybe like transitioning to academia when I'm like older. So any insight would be much appreciated.
Yeah, so I guess it probably depends on the industry. So I guess I'm representing the pharmaceutical industry. And so I think for ways that you can get exposure to, so first I think that probably one of the bigger eye-opening things for me coming into this company was just the opportunities that exist. At our site here, we have everything from early preclinical discovery right through marketed, the business unit and marketed products. And then we also have therapeutic areas that span from diabetes to Alzheimer's disease. And so when you look at the size and scope of the teams that are required to move something from an early idea to a approved marketed product, you start to recognize that there are not just lab-based researchers, but there are people, and that would be in the pharmacology, toxicology, there's regulatory, there are clinical research scientists that coordinate the studies. Most of our clinical trials are run at, or all of our clinical trials are run at contract research organizations. We have medical science liaisons that interact in the field. And so really within that, I think, if you have a better idea of what the opportunities are, then you can try to tailor how to get involved with that to what your interests are. And so specifically to bench research, we have postdocs within Lilly. So people have come in for postdocs, and then if that's a good fit, I've seen a number of postdocs that actually stay on and progress to a research position full-time. There are, we all are encouraged to attend scientific meetings. And so I think there's a lot of good opportunities to interact with people from industry in those meetings and kind of make those connections. So those are a few things. And then I think to get to your question of whether or not you'll like it, I think that's an unknown for any job you take. And so you just have to educate yourself about what the expectations are, and the day-to-day routine looks like, and then see if that aligns with where you think your interests are. Someone once told me that it's a very minor inconvenience for someone to offer you a job, but it's a big, it's a much bigger for you to accept that job, move your family, and have to do that. And so you really have to make sure not just the job description, but the environment that you're coming into is good. And, I think the people that you work with make a big impact there. And I mean,
Jim, there's Dr. Reed, if you would also comment at that, there's a nuance of this, and that is that many of my friends in industry know that if they're a good worker, the company wants to keep them. And so if you start for a year and you don't like where you are, you can say, could you think about moving me to regulatory? I might try that. What can you comment a little bit on that? You're not set, right?
It's true, yeah, and I'm a perfect example of that. So I came into one role and a year later transitioned to this role and have kind of been progressing through that role since. But yeah, as you're within the company, you have a greater visibility of the opportunities, you make the connections, you network, and then you can have a better appreciation of what those other roles are. And there's actually, a pretty significant push, especially recently, on personal development and making sure that you have a career development path and a plan, and there is succession management planning. So your path there's a couple different options that are mapped out for you once you're kind of situated within Lilly, so that you can continue to grow and expand your exposure.
Yeah, is that the same for you, Dr. Reed?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different in the fitness industry, although there are so many similarities, right? Like when you think about the bigger brands within the fitness industry, everything from, for example, the teams at Nike and the Amazon Lab team that's coming out with the new Halo product, the Apple Fitness team, it's actually a really small amount of people that are in roles that are like mine, but it's growing at a very rapid rate. And so it's kind of the same thing where I was in a role at Exponential Fitness, similar to this, but a little more junior. And I was kind of like, I think I like this, but I kind of want to do a little bit more of this. And, my boss at Exponential Fitness actually helped me get the role at Orange Theory, because they know that if the different brands work together to kind of keep elevating things, then that means, really good things for the industry overall. So I would say for the fitness industry specifically, figuring out what types of roles there are for people with PhDs in kinesiology and nutrition and other closely related fields, because I think it's something that, from what I know, there's a lot of recruiting going on for. It's just kind of figuring out what those job titles are and where to look for those. That's the tricky part.
So, hi, Dr. Perfield and Dr. Reed. Thanks so much for honoring us with your presence today. So I have a quick question, kind of in relation to the two previous questions. So if you are someone who kind of sees yourself, like your early career, not myself, like graduate student, and you see yourself, you think you like both academia and industry, and you could see yourself in both areas, is it better, like based on your experience or like on your own thoughts, do you think it's better to start off with the academia position and later transition into industry, or vice versa? Which one is easier? Which route is, not that there's an easier route, but which one is smoother? So that if you're making a decision, okay, I can see myself doing both, I would like to, like one of our students said, he wanted to, first go into industry and later on, like us, along the line, transition into academia. Should he go that route, or if like start with academia and later transition to industry, which one is the better route to go based on your own experience? I don't know, just your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I would say it kind of depends, and it might depend on the job industry, right? Like I think you heard Dr. Perfield say he was kind of looking at both. I was kind of trying to figure out both at the same time too, to see which way I wanted to go. And I think the very surprising thing for me when I did transition into the industry full-time was that a lot of the exact same skills that you're taught to really develop throughout graduate school and a postdoc, if you do that, are directly applicable in the industry, just in a slightly varied way. So I think it might depend on what's available, and it probably depends on what you want to do. too, if you have the choice, right? Like that, what a cool idea to be able to have the choice. I know some of my colleagues also have, for example, been in the academic route, but maybe do consulting for an industry company. So I think there's a lot of ways that you could try to do both at the same time and then decide afterwards.
Yeah, I would agree. I think either path that you take, you more than likely have to spend a significant amount of time there, build some additional skills, and then transition back. I think, you know, one of the things from a industry to faculty position, one of the comments that I think I've heard in the past, and I have friends that have actually done both and moved back and forth, is if you're not publishing and you're, you know, how will you come in and establish yourself as a grant writer in academia if you're coming back from an industry? And I think if you have the scientific background, you can still argue, you can still exert yourself and establish yourself there, but that may be a bigger challenge. And then I think going back the other way, it's really all about the key skills that industry is looking for. And so I think it doesn't matter as much what your seniority or experience is, if the fit is right and the position makes sense. So.
I think that goes, I see Dr. Dillon's comment in the chat. So you both did postdocs. Do you feel a postdoc is essential to get an industry job? Is that a realistic plan after a PhD?
So in our position for a lab research, it is. I think competition right now is very high. There's very few jobs that are available, and so it's pretty much a requirement to come into a research scientist level position. That being said, all of our associates typically have at least a master's, and Lilly is a little bit unique from other companies where there's not necessarily a ceiling based on degree. And so there are people that are in the same research track path as me that have been here for 20 years and have progressed from the associate level into our path and can do that. Other companies have some limitations around that. And so I think Lilly's a little unique there and shows that they value the experience that you bring from being here. But yeah, to come directly in, at least to this position, definitely a postdoc is necessary. I think for some of the other positions that I've seen with the medical science liaisons and those, maybe not as necessary.
Yeah, and I would say for the fitness industry, it probably depends on the company. For example, I know that Peloton has a job opening right now that does not require a postdoc. It just says PhD is required. Nike has one open that does require a postdoc because it's in a really specific area. So it probably depends a little bit more on the position that the company is trying to fill in the fitness industry.
Can I mention that you said that it was your impression early on that your mentor was trying to carve you into being in a really narrow area. And I remember feeling that way as well. And I just want to state publicly that the faculty on this call do not want to train little carbon copies of ourselves. Will you please hear us when we say that? What we need to do is to teach you to write and think and communicate and collaborate. And once you learn that, you can take all of those to industry. So the skills that you need to trust us, right? I'm hoping you two agree. The skills that you're learning now will help you no matter where you go, because they're all about communication and rigor. So I just had to say that because I felt exactly the same way when I was a grad student.
No, and I'm so glad you said that, because when I had the conversation where I finally got the nerve up to say, like, Dr. Evans, I'm actually going to take this role in the industry, she was like, we've known that the whole time. I can't believe it took you that long to know. Like, that's awesome. It's perfect for you. And yes, a perfect example, I actually just turned in today to our executive team a literature review about exercising in masks. So yes, and I had to do a presentation about it and everything. I was walking them through figures and tables. So I mean, I think there's a lot that literally directly applies, like 1,000%. I was using EndNote, all of the things that you do right now that you're like, we have to learn this and perfect it. And yeah, but you'll totally use it. So.
I have another question for both of you. I feel like you've kind of touched on this already, but I guess like a more direct answer would be cool. I'm kind of thinking, So working in academia, there's a very clear cut like career growth. Like you start as an assistant professor, hopefully go on a tenure track, move your way up to associate, and then eventually like a full professor. So in industry, in your experience, have you seen that there are opportunities for career growth even with these like terminal degrees that you have?
Sure. So,
You go.
so I guess I can say, you know, every position here at Lilly has a ranking. So they're lettered. So there's there's P's, R's, M's, and they're 1 through 4 to 8. And so when you come into a track, you have the opportunity to, you know, progress within that track. And there are clearly laid, you know, it's a business, so they are very clearly lined out procedures and processes for all of these things. And so there are certain expectations for performance and external interactions, and that just becomes, you know, your influence within the company and externally as it grows, then you also progress on that track. And so that comes with differences in terms of pay scale, bonus, those kinds of things. And then if you're on one track and you want to move to a different role that happens to be on a different track, then it's also mapped out in terms of what's a lateral move or what's a progressive move. And so, yeah, definitely. And I think that all comes back to the part of the professional development piece.
Yeah, and it's much the same even at a much smaller institution like Orange Theory. Our headquarters office has about 250 employees, but it's very similar. I remember my first day, I got the tour from HR, and they walked me through, okay, this is what it means to be a director. Kind of here's the decision-making power. This is the salary range. This is, you know, the bonus structure. Here are the deliverables we're looking for on a quarterly basis. And here's what you need to do to move up to the senior director level. And so all of that roadmap is very clear, so that you know as an employee how to deliver, and that you know, all of the KPIs that you need to hit, you have very clearly mapped out, and that you have that open loop of communication with the executive team.
So would you say it's kind of like going into a potential interview, it's like important to bring that up, like that idea of career growth, and kind of like go through whether it's HR, the hiring manager, whoever that is, to just kind of talk about those opportunities?
Yeah, I definitely think asking questions about career growth and the value that the company places on professional development is incredibly important. And I know that they really like when you ask questions about that. It shows that you're serious, that you've thought through more than just like a short-term stint at the company, that you really value the company and want to be there for enough time to progress. So I think absolutely, yeah.
I have couple questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Reed and Perfield, for coming and joining us. So thinking about postdoc in industry and that sort of idea, and I heard what you were saying, Dr. Perfield, about going to meetings, and in this time when our meetings are all virtual, it can be a little bit more difficult to just walk up and be like, I'm really interested in what you do. I'm finishing up here. Do you have any opportunities? So I'd like to hear both of your thoughts about creating those kinds of opportunities, and what you think a good structure might be to open some of those doors and to ask some of those questions within industries that may not already have an existing fellowship, but you may be trailblazing.
So Lilly posts all of their open positions on careers.com. They have lilycareers.com. That's probably the best place to find these opportunities. We also have some internships that are posted there. And I think, so that would be the best way to identify it initially. I will say that is a bit of a black box. So if you have a connection within a company, regardless of where they are, if you apply to a position, it's always best if you could also contact them, see if they can identify who the hiring manager is, and at least pass your application that way also. I have a story from my wife who was in regulatory when she was at the animal health group at Elanco, and they were recruiting someone from the FDA in regulatory from FDA to a position they had open, and that person submitted their application, and the algorithm that they used to sort applications did not select them. So you know, it is a bit of a black box. That you know, so you have to be a little proactive and not just submit there. I think if you want to make sure that your resume is seen, and then I think beyond that, I've had a number of people reach out on LinkedIn and other ways to make a connection. I think if you see people that are publishing in that area, it's okay to, you know, follow up on that and say, I was interested in this. Would you ever have an opportunity for that? And that would be having that personal connection. I think keeping someone in the back of your mind helps when those opportunities do come around. You know, I think we have 3 postdocs for our whole diabetes therapeutic area, so it's not a large number, and they're 4-year positions, so they don't come around that often.
Yeah, and I'll just add on that I 1000% agree with LinkedIn connections. I've even had some connections made on Instagram, believe it or not, like Dr. Dillon and I. But I have actually even hired someone on my team recently who reached out to me on LinkedIn. She had recently been put on furlough from her company, actually Equinox, and she reached out just to say, hey, if you have 20 minutes, I'd love to, like, you know, buy you a virtual coffee and just meet for 20 minutes and talk about my experience. And I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. So we chatted, and then a couple months later, when we were able to hire somebody, I forwarded her the application and said, hey, I think based on your credentials and experience, you might be a really good fit. So I think, you know, not being afraid to reach out to people is so huge. And it took me a while to gain comfort with that. I don't know if any of you have ever experienced imposter syndrome. Dr. Lindbergh and I were actually talking about that before we started recording, where, you know, even for this, I was like, what? They want to hear from me. Maybe I'll have 1 or 2 things that could be helpful. But then I'm like, okay, but I have lived that path, and it hasn't been so long since I've been in your shoes. And so just encourage you to have that confidence, because you've made it this far because you're a rock star and you've worked really, really hard and had a lot of perseverance. And those are all skills that you need and that the industry needs too. So.
And I think having some of the comfort also works the other way. And so if I know of a position here that people I'm close to are looking for, I'll also send out to other faculty members that I know or other people and say, you know, do you have a student coming along that would be a good fit for this? Just to, you know, it's always better. And I think that's why you can move within Lilly so much, that if people already have an understanding of you and a comfort there, then that makes it easier than the unknown to bring someone new in. And so having a reference from a faculty member goes a long way.
Do either of you have like suggestions on the types of questions that you should be asking in the interview space in an industry job?
Yes, I think you are on a good track with asking about career progression. I think asking about roles and responsibilities, of course, like what are the responsibilities that you need to meet to be effective in your role. And then I think also kind of getting to know the person a little bit is really important. And interviews take practice. It's something that is definitely a skill. And I would just encourage you to remember that as much as somebody's interviewing you, like you're also interviewing them. So that's a key thing that I know you probably have heard before, but just it's so true.
Yeah, I think understanding if it's a new position or if it's a position that somebody left, asking why they might have left, you know, what does success look like here? And then also, I think beyond what questions you should ask, understanding what kind of questions you will be asked will also be helpful, right? And so Lilly at least uses I can't remember the name of it right now, but essentially they're asking you for different examples, real life situations of different situations that you've been in. You know, give an example where you had to convince a team of, you know, sway the opinion of a team, or when something didn't work out and how did you deal with it, or, you know, so real life scenarios of how you interact with people, deal with adversity, those kinds of things. And so equally being prepared for that.
So what are some big positives of transitioning to the industry from academia? And what do you miss about academia?
I'll start by saying what I miss the most is actually interacting with students. I loved that so much. Like many of you, I was able to do both research and teaching throughout my PhD, and then had that 1 year in the temporary faculty position. So I really do miss getting to connect with students in that way, and like seeing those aha moments, or that like moment of like self-discovery where you really, that you watch them get the hang of something. So I miss that. But I think there's so many pros. I think for me, one of the things that really drew me was the ability to like see the impact of the work on a bigger scale. So part of my job at Orange Theory is overseeing the team that creates all the workout programming. And we have about 1 million members that do that in studios, even though we're at, half capacity in many locations, and then 6 million that take the workout online every day. And so I think about the magnitude of like all of that, and think about the impact of, gosh, if I could just make a couple more people move more often, that can have such huge health implications. So I think for me, that's been something that's really, really cool. And I know that I'm standing on the backs of giants, because there've been decades and decades of research to make that programming. And so thinking about that connection of all the hard work that academia does and brings to life is super cool.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I agree. Being able to have a view of the clinic and being able to make an impact and take a drug from an idea to something that could be marketable is pretty impressive. I think, this recent COVID situation, Lilly actually opened up a testing center here. We got to be hands-on, volunteering in that, and seeing that, I think just especially early on, seeing these lines of cars coming through, and the worry in people's faces and the appreciation of having a way to be able to test very quickly, it was pretty impactful, and more so than even seeing a drug here now that we would potentially, 10 years from now, go into the clinic. So that really, I think, hit home in terms of the impact that a pharmaceutical company can make when you put an effort behind it. And I think the other piece of being within industry is that there is that effort there if there is enough business case for it. And so the size and scope of the teams and how quickly they can move is really impressive. But from an academic standpoint, I didn't move here because I didn't move here because academia wasn't something that I was interested in. It was a family reason, and so there are a lot of things that I miss from an academic standpoint also, and I think the students is one. So it's a very different dynamic when you come into a role and your associates are this is their career, right? And so they're kind of locked into a time schedule, and they are very proficient at what they're doing. So there's not a lot of teaching necessary unless you're moving into a different area, but that is just their job. They turn the crank. And so getting postdocs, and we have summer interns, and we have 1-year internships with a couple of universities, where we can bring in new ideas and new enthusiasm for science is really great. And so I've been very fortunate to have a number of those students come through my lab here, so I get to touch that some also. I think things that are the same in both places is there's politics everywhere, and you have to learn how to navigate those waters. I don't have to write grants, but I still have to go to governance committees. I can at least look the people in the face of those that I have to make my argument with. It's not a black box that I submit something to and wait 6 months and hear back. But, things that are in scope or out of scope are always changing. And so you have to be a little bit adaptable to that. And so if you're not comfortable with that, then probably in academia, where you can carve out your own niche, may be more comfortable for you. But I think even now in the current funding environment, you have to be able to collaborate, and you can't just go it on your own. And so whether you're in academia or industry, I think there's more similarities than not. And so, at least me personally, I could be happy in both places.
I have a quick question, and specifically, Dr. Perfield, you brought this up, the COVID crisis that we're currently in. Do you see that job opportunities have lessened because of it? Or are there more furloughs in certain companies and industry jobs than there were pre-COVID? And how does that affect the competitiveness of the field?
Yeah, so I know at Lilly, we've not had any, everyone has been moved to work from home, and then they're slowly bringing people back to the lab, but we've not had any, jobs that have been lost because of this. And really, given all the manufacturing that we have here for all the medicines that we have to get to people, they've been extra careful about exposures and limiting and social distancing within the different facilities and complexes. So, and I think that this has also really opened the eyes to, upper management of what is really necessary, or what's the new way to work. So that's kind of, I think there'll be a lot more working from home. My wife works in regulatory for Lilly now, and she probably won't be going back till next summer, if at all. Like, there's not a need to be there other than having some personal connections, which is always, or a change of scenery. And so they're looking for new ways to do that. And I think with what that's going to do, while overall job opportunities may not be changing or decrease, at least initially, I know, Lilly being in the Midwest has always had the knock against it that it's not on the coasts, and so it's not as competitive or where people want to be. But I think what you're seeing now is with the virtual, a lot of people from the coast are, where you live doesn't necessarily mean have to be where you work. And so there's going to be a lot more freedom in that case. And so I think you'll see a lot more, not at the lab bench, but for a lot of the other positions, flexibility in where you're actually located in the job that you're doing.
I totally agree about the flexible work style. I think that COVID has changed that for so many different industries. And just to add on to that fitness industry specifically, I think COVID and actually having executive teams like watch a living, breathing science experiment, for lack of a better word, has really highlighted the need for scientists and people who are trained in exercise and nutrition and public health on their teams. So we're actually seeing an increase in demand in the fitness industry for highly qualified candidates. So I think that's a very small silver lining. As you guys might imagine, the brick and mortar fitness companies have taken a huge hit, as so many other industries have. But the silver lining is that the corporate teams they're willing to invest even more so in having the right people on the teams. So pretty cool.
Yeah, I had a question. Great discussion so far, but I was wondering to what extent an MBA would have on your marketability or your, I guess, ceiling within that company. Like, would it make you more in demand? Because it seems like a one-year program might have a huge. I don't know if you guys have thought about that, retrospectively.
You were breaking up a little bit. Did you ask about an MBA? Yeah. So actually, I think within Lilly, they actually have so I think MBAs can provide you with some added benefit within Lilly, and they actually have programs where you can go back and get your MBA. Lilly will pay for it while you're here. So there's definitely a drive for that. And actually, individuals that don't have a PhD there's also a program with IU and IUPUI here that employees of Lilly can go back and get their PhDs also and work on research that way. So in terms of professional development and things, but yeah, I think either having an MBA or getting one while you're here is fairly common and could open some additional doors for you.
Yeah, and I would say the same thing. Even Orange Theory, again, a smaller company, has programs that can help somebody go back and get an MBA, because understanding the business knowledge is something that you may not really get exposed to very much throughout graduate school, just depending on what your role is and how your lab works, right? And those couple of years as a clinical research coordinator for me allowed me a little peek into that. But I've learned so much about business over the past couple of years being in industry.
I have one quick question. So, because I'm really naive of what industry means, like what it looks like from a science perspective. So, does industry equal large corporation, or is there a spectrum that can include smaller businesses or smaller companies?
Yeah, I would say it's more of a spectrum. For example, the fitness industry has a lot of smaller companies that kind of all work together at the corporate level. Because again, we know if one company does really well, of course we want to do just as well or better than they are doing. But we know that if everyone's doing well, we can kind of take steps up together. So, I mean, Orange Theory, for example, is a relatively small corporate team, even though there are stores in 24 countries all over the globe. So I think definitely a spectrum, whereas where Dr. Perfield works is a massive operation that's, globally recognized. So I think, but I would still consider that we both work in the industry. What do you think, Dr. Perfield?
No, I agree. And, even within the pharmaceutical industry, there are small biotechs, companies that are handful, and then they kind of grow organically. So there's definitely a range of sizes. And actually, in terms of large pharma, Lilly's one of the smaller companies there.
Thank you.
This has been fantastic. I feel like we could go for another hour or 2 hours, and I think all our questions wouldn't be answered. But since I'm the last one, I'm going to ask my question, and then we can probably wrap up. But I still think industry for me is elusive. Would you just tell us like what one of your days looks like? Like what do you do in a day, and maybe what's your favorite part of the day?
Yeah, I can start with mine. So, and maybe it'll help to tell you a little bit more about what my job actually entails. And so I would say my job kind of has 3 buckets. One is research and development. One is overseeing the workout programming for all the studios around the globe. And then one is really working with our data team, because at Orange Theory, for every member who's taking class, we collect second by second data. And so we're always analyzing that in the background, which is really crazy to think about how much data we have. And so for me, for example, this morning, I tested a workout at home. We have at-home workouts now too. So I woke up at 5, tested a workout, put feedback into our team's chat, and then we had a stand-up meeting with the team just to make sure we were aligned on what needed to be completed before the end of the week. So that we could ensure we had all the deliverables ready to go. Then I was in meetings for most of the day. Just like Dr. Perfield said, a lot of things are virtual now. So I've been looking at my computer screen and looking more and more tired throughout the whole day. But some really, really cool meetings. So thinking, it could be anything from working with a vendor on a new product that we want to launch in the studios, to meeting with the IT team to talk about how to display these performance data for members in the mobile app in Q1. What kind of things do we want to do there? What can we say to them that's digestible and that a layperson will understand with their performance data? So, and then I feel like at the end of the day, typically have a quick wrap-up call with my team again, just to make sure everything's good to go. But being a global company, I actually have someone on my team who's in Australia, who is now a 15-hour time difference. So I have a meeting with her after this, and we'll talk through some things and problem solve as much as we need to. So it's always, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of moving parts. And then when we are at HQ, I actually have a physiology lab there. So it's a test and learn lab. We have metabolic carts. We have a bod pod. We have in-body scanners. So we have a lot of different technology that we get to test and learn and use there too. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I knew this question was coming based on some of the emails that I exchanged, and it actually was good timing, because right before the pandemic, we were switching everything over to Office 365 and Microsoft Teams. And so recently we've been getting this My Analytics output from that. I think they track everything here. And so I clicked on that, and it told me that I spend 60% of my time in meetings over the last 4 weeks. I've sent 438 emails and read 1,349 and had 150 chats or calls in the last 4 weeks. So, that spends 60% of my time. And so it is a lot of meetings, I think. And then the rest of the time, I'm either working on slides for the next meeting, or meeting with my associates, or reading the literature, and so I think my lab being in early discovery, we are doing a lot of reading of the literature and patents and trying to reproduce data. So I think that we could have a whole discussion around the lack of reproduction from publications on new targets. I spend a lot of time, so in addition to my own projects, my lab supports a number of other projects that are in the portfolio. So at any one time, I have 2 or 3 projects that I'm driving myself, and then we're supporting another 4 or 5. My lab runs a lot of in vivo and in vitro assays looking at liver and fat metabolism. I have some external connections, so we also offer some grant opportunities from to connect with faculty in pre-competitive space. And so right now I actually have I've been fortunate enough to have a couple of those funded recently, and so I'm interacting with those faculty members. We do a lot of public-private consortium, so I spend some of my time actually with a European innovative medicines initiative on NASH biomarkers, and so that actually being in a different time zone also changes things a little bit. So we're actually have a couple of big meetings coming up for that, so I'm spending a lot of time interacting with those teams and putting together more slide decks. We evaluate, our search and evaluate teams bring in new ideas, and so we're either meeting in those meetings and trying to evaluate those through different due diligence processes, or actually bringing molecules in and testing those to see if they're something of interest to us. We're expanding into RNAi therapeutics right now, and so there's a lot of platform building to harness that technology. Lilly's one of the few companies that has, at least within diabetes, large molecule, insulin, and oral therapies approved. So we have SGLT2 inhibitors, we have incretins, and we have insulins. And so, there's never a shortage of things to be exposed to, and now we're branching into RNA therapeutics also. So any and/or all of those things can be on my calendar in any one day. And so, that's kind of how my day is organized, is just by those meetings. And then I try to use the time that's in between those as best as possible.
That's great. Thank you. I will say, for any students that are still debating, I think if you ask Dr. Parks or any other faculties on the call, we're probably in meetings a lot too. So that was fantastic. I've seen in the chat, everybody's, this is fantastic. It's fascinating. Thank you both so much. I do think we could learn a lot more from you than what we let you teach us in 1 hour. But we won't hold you over. We've already held it over 5 minutes. So if everybody could unmute and just give a big round of applause. This is fantastic.
It was very good, very informative.
Thanks,
Thank
Jill.
you. Yeah,
Thank
it was
you.
really well done.
Thank you.
And feel free to reach out anytime. If you pass along my contact information, that's fine.
Yeah, same here.
Thank
Good to
you.
know.
That would be wonderful. I was going to ask, and I'm glad you volunteered, because I think a lot of us have a lot of questions. So.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Have a good
Thank you,
night.
guys.
Thanks.
Guys,
Bye.
Bye.
take care. Stay safe.
Yep.
Yes. I'll just say 1,000 times, thank you so much, Dr. Perfield. That was really, really helpful.
No problem. Talk to you
And
later.
I'm sorry, I just saw you sent an email. I'm glad you got the link.
Yeah, no, well, so I found it in the Word document that you sent, but Scott had also forwarded me the thing, and so I had the number in there. So anyway.
Oh, good. Well, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jackie. See you guys.
Thank you.